Welcome back. But isn't part of the problem that if we had more and more egalitarian public funding of political parties, we may not have this problem?
Yes, and I think that that's a part of the solution. I think we might need to think about this. But I want to come back to earlier questions. If people are saying that they don't want to declare their funding because they are worried about the impacts, and that ultimately anyway this money goes around, well, stealing happens in a society and corruption happens in a society. Why the hell do we regulate it? We regulate it because it's not appropriate. It undermines the democracy, and that's not what we should be doing. This is wrong because it undermines accountability. If it's wrong, these politicians should have the honor to actually take a stand on it. And frankly, none of them, the opposition or the ruling party. The ruling party, it's shameful given its democratic history, given its commitments to the Freedom Charter, that it takes this position. The opposition party, it's even more shameful because it complains about the ruling party and then never has the courage to do anything else. So all of them, and what this does is delegitimizes politicians and it delegitimizes the political institutions. Until we address this, this is going to become a serious problem. On the second hand, there is about 90 to 100 million that is spent of public money. And we got to look at a more appropriate way of doing that. How we spend that, is that spent in the public interest? Is it done in a democratic way? How do we ensure that it's not corruption? How do we ensure that it doesn't land up in the party leaders' pockets? All of that is important. But that does not obviate the need for private funding to be declared. Otherwise, we'd have the Americans, the British, the Russians, and the Chinese giving money to all of these guys and determining our funding.
Well, how do we know that they don't?
Well, that's the danger.
So how do you respond to that?
Well, as I said, I'm just articulating the views because the status
Well, I'd
quo
like
that we
your
have,
view too,
yes.
but you carry on articulating.
So basically, it's like this. Political parties will argue that you have one of three ways maybe to participate in this democracy, which is you can volunteer your time as a party person, you could donate your money, or you can stand for public representative or leadership role for the party. So basically, it's saying why put a limitation on that one aspect of participation, because giving money is essentially participation. And to also maybe to respond to one of your questions is this thing effectively stopped in Parliament in 2011 when they realized that and I quote, they said it's not in the spirit of constitutionality. So basically, there is no framework by which they can say, limit this legal person, this party, this political party, have it disclosed.
Yes, they can. They just pass a law.
Well, will it stand a constitutional test?
Why not?
So basically,
why would it not? Sorry. One of the most interesting things is when the United States Supreme Court was idiotic enough to pass a judgment, an opinion as they call them, in a case, majority, not the minority, called Citizens United. It completely changed the trajectory of American politics because it allowed limitless funds from big corporations to go. It's totally influenced the way American politics works, and it's become a completely unwieldy and unworkable system as a result. And people go back and say that judgment had a lot to do with it.
But it's also cynical in the extreme. When you use the Constitution to subvert the very democracy the Constitution is meant to entrench.
You mean the freedom, my freedom?
The fundamental freedoms, the fundamental democracies, the fundamental principle of the Constitution is to entrench the accountability dynamic. And to use that Constitution and the constitutional test to subvert that very substantive intent of the Constitution is cynical in the extreme.
Well, and what do you say about that?
Well, again, articulating what caused our legislators to not effectively legislate on this. They say that basically limitation, that's governed by Section 36(1), right? Talking about why you should put a limitation to the Bill of Rights effectively. So they said that could not stand because you would say to this legal person who is this political party, disclose, and also those who are also donating to this will effectively possibly not want to participate, therefore undermining the very constitutionality
doesn't it worry you?
And the wide spectrum of political parties that are allowed in the system.
Real reason. That's not
that's what they are.
But the real reason, you know what the real reason is.
Of course, the real reason is that they like this laissez-faire environment. They do not really have to admit to it, but of course this is what has caused the slow pace of change in this regard.
Can I just make a distinction very quickly? First of all, there is public funding that goes towards political parties for the maintenance of the political party as just
And
an
do we
organization.
know as taxpayers where our money goes?
That is very well regulated. They have to submit their accounts saying how they spend their money to the IEC. That's one matter. And
So as long as the IEC holds, we're okay on that.
But that part of it is fine. What we're talking about, the contentious bit, is really the private donations, the private sector. But going back to what you were saying in terms of the way in which that money can be distributed, which is what political parties have been trying to raise, that the smaller political parties would like a larger share of that pie. There are countries, Lesotho for instance, that 50% of that pie of money is distributed equally amongst the political parties, and then the remaining 50% is then distributed proportionally.
We're talking about the public money.
The public money.
Yeah,
now we're talking about the public money. So we're talking about different ways of doing that. There's also the potential of limiting the total amount of money that is spent on election campaigns. You raise a very good point. In the United States, for the first time in the last elections, they surpassed $1 billion
Well, look what
on
Citizens
campaigning.
United did. Citizens United had a disastrous effect.
And we're talking about the complete kind of corruption of the very idea of politics, where elections are no more about ideas, they're about marketing. Who can sell the best product or market the best product, pay the best advertisers to come up with the best jingo or slogan that will appeal to people to get them to vote for a political party. This subverts the very idea of politics.
I'm not worried what the jingles are. I'll tell you what the concern is. The concern is when somebody gives R1 billion or whatever it is to a political party, one is interested in that because because if, for example, a month or two later I found out that a particular corporation has now been, as it were, entertained with a particular tender which it's got or something else, then one puts connections together and transparent government then becomes important. Without it, I haven't started a clue, and neither we do.
And that's precisely why the legislators don't want to do it. It's not about the rhetoric. It's not about the constitutional test. To be honest, they don't want to be held accountable.
Why would the minority parties fall for that?
Because the minority parties are also getting cash. And if they have to declare that, they're worried how the benefactors who are giving them money would react and start cutting the funds because they're looking for goodies. It's not about participation. This giving money is not about participation in South Africa. It's about getting access to goodies. And that's the problem. Once we declare that, once we make that illegal, then, or at least make it transparent enough so that we can tie the dots together, then we can have a much more accountable system. It is hypocritical, it is particularly outrageous that when every single society, including COSATU in the Tripartite Alliance, calls for transparency of funding, that every single party refuses to declare it. It makes politicians look bad. It delegitimizes the political system, and every single one of those legislators should hang their heads in shame for actually allowing this set of circumstances.
Let's also be clear.
Before I give you an opportunity, sorry, Karen.
Let's just very quickly be clear to back that up. Starting with the 2005 judgment that IDASA brought to try to get the political parties to disclose their revenue. The ruling party committed itself to providing legislation that would fill this gap, and it was one of the reasons why IDASA didn't pursue the case, and it was one of the escapes that the judge had in terms of the judgment. The second aspect is they have committed to this in Polokwane, they've committed to it individually, they have it consistently made the point that this is a gap that needs to be filled with legislation. They have also the commitments to the African Union under the Combating Corruption, Prevention and Combating Corruption to provide this kind of legislation. There is a big gap here, and
which should be filled, is what you're saying.
Needs to be
Fair
filled.
enough. I must take a break. We'll debate this as soon as we come back.
News that moves. ENCA.com.